Yeah, my name's Sadhbh, and my name, if you come across it, if you come to any of our events, it's spelled Sadhbh, so it doesn't look at all how it's pronounced, right? So it's Sadhbh rhymes with 5, and this is Jamie, rhymes with Jamie. So we'd just like to do our acknowledgement of country, and Mandharma acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of the great and ancient Ghana country where we are gathered today, and we pay our respects to their ancestors, their elders and leaders, past, present and emerging. And in Ireland we say Mass Mór, which means great respect in Gaelic. So we're here to talk about Mandharma.
Yeah, I'll provide a bit of a short overview. So this is a program which we've been sort of running for 9 years or something, since Sadhbh's research initially came out. But it's something that's recently been picked up by the SA government. It's available on computer, tablet or smartphone, and we have a huge selection of additional resources that we'll tell you about. You'll see on your brochures there's a QR code where you can just snap your phone and you'll be able to register for free. We'll also throw that QR code up again later in the presentation.
So I'll tell you a little bit about where this program comes from. So my background is as a psychologist, and I worked for many years in inpatient and outpatient settings, and during that time I actually got to meet initially a lot of first responders who were coming in for treatment of depression, anxiety, PTSD. And what was really interesting to me was noticing what practices were really resonating with these people, because often they were like 20 years on the job or so, and suddenly something would happen on the job and it floored them, and really experienced people as well. And what I decided to do was actually create a program that looked at developing these skills very early on. So I was interested to see what would happen if people were given early access to these skills versus waiting to when things get really full on for them. And so we developed a pilot version of Mandharma, and we ran it with Fire and Rescue New South Wales, and we found that it worked. So we developed a lot of different strategies and skills to help manage stress, and I'll get into that in a moment, but we were really focused on enhancing resiliency. And when I was doing my research with first responders, it was very interesting what they were sharing on their concept of what psychological resilience is. And the common myth about resilience, particularly in Australia, it's very similar in Ireland, is that being resilient means to be tough, stoic, to push through, that you come through life's challenges and difficulties completely unscathed, and that you can just toughen up and, get on with stuff. And the Fireys taught me some really interesting phrases like take a spoonful of concrete, toughen up, buttercup, a couple of curse words were thrown in as well. And that's what they were told growing up as well. They were like, oh, this is interesting, this concept of just having to push on through all the time. And when we look at the research says that you're not born resilient, actually. It's not something that is inherited, but it's actually something innate to all our brains and bodies. Like, we're hardwired to be resilient naturally, but it does fluctuate a lot, particularly if we're going through tough times and we're experiencing a lot of stress. Stress really undermines our resilience, and I'll highlight how that happens in a moment. But we can boost resiliency, which is what I was witnessing in therapy a lot, by developing certain practices and strategies, and that's what Mandharma aims to do. Great to have you here. How are you? So we've been running a small business, as Jamie said, for quite a few years. We've also been sole traders. The common challenges we know from the research among small business owners and sole traders is this idea of this having a constant workload and never really being able to turn off, because it's always in the back of our minds, the level of responsibility. We have to deal with financial certainty, trying to do things on our own a lot. At times we have to deal with difficult clients and customers. We're managing others if we've smaller teams. Working with family, like I absolutely adore my husband, but I know we frustrate each other even after all these years. But I like to think we've built resiliency because we're still together running this business. We have to take on lots of different roles, so we're constantly switching hats. And we don't always have downtime. Thanks for coming. And then we often talk about, Jamie and I, and when I'm doing talks at conferences and workshops, this idea of the curse of competency. Often people who run small businesses are naturally very conscientious and have a lot of competence. But what do you think the downside of that is? Any takers?
Increased demand on your time and expertise?
100%. And there can be this loaded feeling like, look, leave it to me, I'll get it done because I know how to get it done. And it's really hard to delegate, you know. So what happens when we're constantly dealing with these challenges on an ongoing basis is that it can really lead to high levels of stress. So stress, how does stress emerge for us, do you think, as human beings? You might have noticed it in yourself or other people. I hear you, yeah. Watching the trains go by and trying to get there on time. Yeah, so we react to our environment, and how do we feel it in our bodies? Anxious. So that sense of our heart rate might increase. We might feel shortness of breath sometimes. For me, it often shows up in the pit of my stomach, like right here, I'll get this little bit of a knot. Now I know what it is, but back in the day, it used to terrify me. But stress generally emerges when we're dealing with a lot of challenges and our resources are low because we've had to put all our energy into our work and then often our family as well. Or if we're dealing with a situation like what you're describing that's completely outside of your control, you can't hurry up the trains moving through the intersection even though you really want to. Or at times our coping strategies that we've maybe learned or picked up along the way in life, they're not really holding space for us in the same way as we need them to. So we may not have the same level of coping that we need. What we know from the research is that, and I've certainly witnessed this over the years in my work in private practice, is that stress, when it emerges, it has a deep impact on our bodies physiologically, on our brains, and as a result of that, it can impact our business, without a doubt. And I can testify to that too. So a little bit of stress is normal and natural. It actually motivates us. It can get us going in the morning. But if we have consistent, prolonged stress, that's when it can become quite problematic. And it can cause this part of the brain called the limbic system. This is a collection of different areas of the brain that work together. And this is often known as our fight, flight, or freeze mode. This is our survival network. Now, that part of the brain we need. When an alarm goes off, we don't even think this switches on, goes into overdrive and helps us get to safety. And in fact, it's the first part of the brain that's fully evolved by the time we're born. Other parts of the brain are still growing, but this part of the brain is ready and raring to go. And again, it's because it's geared to protect us. But what happens when we're dealing with a lot of external resources, guess what? This part of the brain still kicks off. So it responds to stress as it's a danger, and it can accumulate. And this is what depletes our energy, physically and emotionally, and it really impacts our resiliency. That's what I mean by it going up and down. As a result of that, that's what actually increases our risk of burnout, emotional fatigue, especially if we're dealing with a lot of customers at work, but we may also be having to support people in our family, our family or at home, supporting elderly parents. And that in turn increases our risk of common mental health conditions such as anxiety and depression. Does anyone know the stats around mental health in small business owners? Yeah, it's pretty massive. Look, so we know small business represents about 98% of business across all of Australia. We also know there's high levels of stress, but at the moment, research from Everymind in New South Wales has found, back in 2017, it's probably a bit higher now, but 51% of small business owners report anxiety and 56 report symptoms associated with depression. The important thing to take away from this is that those conditions are absolutely treatable if we are linking in with the right resources. But unfortunately, what Everymind also found was that only 1% of small business owners were accessing support and resources. And that's probably due to, what do you think? Yeah, absolutely, time, because of all those challenges that we listed earlier, which were just work related. We weren't even talking about trying to get to the dentist or bring the dog to the vet or get to your kid's football game or all the other just normal life things we're trying to do. So we may, as a result of stress, have that physical fatigue. We may experience cognitive fatigue. I certainly have had this at different times in my past. You know, when you're, a great example of this is I was running around the house, this was a couple of years ago, but it really stuck with me, and I was trying to find my car keys, and they were in my hand while I was having a phone call with someone. So if you ever have that experience, that's a sign that our working memory is really depleted because we're knackered. But our tendency isn't to slow down and care for ourselves, and we're going to touch on that a little later. As a result of that, because we're in that heightened state, that fight-flight state, we tend to be a bit more reactive in our interactions. So we might say or do things that are kind of out of alignment with who we are and our personal values. So, and then we feel regret and shame afterwards, but it's actually very normal for stress to result in reactivity. So what is the solution to this? So this is where our research kind of comes in. It's not about sucking it up and carrying on. Again, resiliency is about adaptability. It fluctuates and we can replenish it with different skills. But I would say out of all the skills that we teach at Mind Dharma, one of the most important ones is self-compassion and self-care. It's totally underestimated. But I'm just going to pause here to consider, what do you guys do for self-care? If you want to give some examples when you get a chance for it. Petting a dog can be self-care. Thanks, Harvey. Exercise. A brilliant self-care strategy because it's proven to actually protect mental health, and it's now being used to treat depression as well. Any other examples? Sleep, and sleep is a hugely protective factor. Getting enough sleep, good quality sleep. Any other? Read a book, yeah, those kind of activities that help you wind down. For me, it's spending time in nature, having meditation. Jamie loves mountain biking. Things that really help calm the nervous system. Yoga, yeah, great example. Gardening, things that you enjoy essentially. So when we are developing certain skills and strategies, it helps us manage stress, it helps us calm that limbic system. And what Mind Dharma aims to do is really support people developing self-compassion, because in Australia and in certain parts of the world too, there is this tendency again to just harden up buttercup, push on through. We're not robots, we're quite emotional creatures, and we need our emotions to be able to connect with one another and empathize with one another. And what do those emotions mean? Because there's actually a lot of value underlying our emotions, even the tricky ones. We also, as I've mentioned, self-compassion, but look at how can we actually rest and give ourselves permission to rest. The people I've met in private practice over the years who had small businesses or sole traders really struggled with this because their mind was always focused on the business. But how do you section off time to give back to yourself? And then, what you guys have already mentioned some of this, but in Mind Dharma we also explore things like sleep, movement, and also nutrition. There's this really interesting emerging area of research called nutritional psychiatry, that what we put into our gut has a direct impact on our brains and body. So eating really healthy, fresh food can absolutely boost our mood. At the end of Mind Dharma, there's also an opportunity to reflect on all the different skills and practices you've explored in the modules, but you plan your own self-care action plan, which can be a bit different for people who have never done that before. But what we've heard from different people who've worked that they find that quite helpful. So the practices in Mind Dharma, like you remember the limbic system, fight, flight, freeze response, the practices, particularly mindful self-compassion, activate very different areas of the brain that are collectively sometimes referred to as the caregiver system. But what's really interesting about these areas of the brain, like the medial orbital cortex, which is basically this part of the brain under the frontal lobes, they really help calm the body fairly quickly. And they do this two ways. They activate those areas of the brain, but they also activate the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body. And that nerve actually relays information from your gut to the brain and back and forth. And I'm going to highlight in a moment how it does this. But what's very interesting when you're practicing some of the skills in Mind Dharma is that when it's activating these areas of the brain, it starts to release neurotransmitters that kind of act like hormones in the brain, called vasopressin and oxytocin. Has anyone heard of oxytocin? Yeah. So that, there's also drugs that really activate oxytocin. This is like a natural way of activating oxytocin. So a great example is when you're petting a dog. We actually get a little hit of oxytocin. And when we see a friend that we haven't seen for a while, we're like, how are you doing? Or we hug someone that we care about, we get natural oxytocin. It's so good for our nervous system, and it starts to calm the fight, flight, freeze response. It starts to actively reduce the stress hormones of cortisol and adrenaline, so that flighty feeling starts to soften. As a result of that, we get greater mental clarity. There's a pause between our thoughts. And out of that, we start to have greater creativity. We start to approach things in a different way. And that's where innovation is thought to come from, actually. But probably most importantly, in our daily lives, it helps us respond to life's challenges rather than just reacting. And we'll all react to things every day, even if you've learned a lot of these skills. We'll always have moments of reactivity because that's who we are. That's our networking, our circuitry in our brains. But the more we practice these skills, we're able to pause and respond with that greater clarity. And importantly, the more we do this, the more we're able to tap in and ask, what do I need right now? Which a lot of people are terrible at doing, especially small business owners, because they're focused on everything else. What would be most supportive of me? What would help fill my cup in this moment? So there's some of the benefits of how it works. Before I share how to access the program, and Jamie will go into that, I'd love to share a short practice with you from our program so you can get a sense of it. And probably good to do now before we have any more wine, etc., because that might change the felt experience of it. But to do this, you just have to have both feet on the ground, and even if you want to stand up and take a stretch, because you've been sitting here listening to me waffle on for about 20 minutes, so if you want to stand up and stretch for a moment or get a little bit more comfortable, this goes for about 4 minutes, so fairly short. So what we want to do is initially just roll our shoulders out, whether it's back or forward, just feeling into our bodies. Maybe taking a bigger, smaller stretch depending on what feels right for you. And then what we want to do is we want to feel into our eyes. Now for some of you it might feel quite comfortable to close your eyes. That feels natural. And for others it might feel better to soften the gaze to one point in front of you. So just take a moment and feel, and does it feel better to just totally close the eyes for this pause, just a few moments for you? Or does it feel better to just soften the gaze to one point in front of you? Just doing what feels best. And then we're just going to take a moment here to feel into our breath in your own time, just taking a nice deep inhale and exhaling. And let's just do this again, another inhale and exhaling in your own time. And you might start to notice as you do this the sounds around you, just welcoming any sounds of traffic in the distance, sounds of Harvey making his way around the crowd. Taking a moment again to feel into your breath, and this time just starting to consider, can you feel into the nourishing quality of your breath? As you breathe in, the breath naturally provides the body with fresh oxygen, nutrients to every layer of your body, every limb, every organ, every cell. And with your next exhale, seeing if you can feel into the soothing and softening quality of the exhale. And you might like to extend the exhale just a little in your own time. Allowing the inhale to be nourishing and the exhale to be just soothing and softening and supportive. Just letting go a little bit. And again, doing this one more time, allowing the inhale to be nourishing and the exhale to be soothing and softening. Just extending the exhale a little. This really nourishes the nervous system because it stimulates the vagus nerve and tells the body it's safe and okay to be here right now. Taking this time for you. And then just take a moment to feel into your legs and your feet. And if it feels okay, you might just push your feet into the ground for a moment, as best you can, noticing any tension as you do this, pushing the toes and the heels into the ground, welcoming that tension for a moment, and then letting it go, allowing the legs to soften, maybe just wriggling them a little bit, shaking them, feeling into the opposite of feeling. And doing this one more time, pushing the feet into the ground and the heels, noticing the tension, welcoming it for a moment, that sense of groundedness, and then releasing, just letting it go. And then feeling your back in the chair, your feet on the ground. And just taking a moment longer here to consider what small act of self-care can you take in the next few hours or days that will really nourish you, that will support you, that you know works for you in terms of giving back to your brain and your body. Might be something really simple. And just holding an intention to honor this. And then just letting it go and seeing how it returns to you over the rest of the week. Feeling into your breath once more, taking a nice deep inhale and exhale. And then gently bringing your focus back into the space around you, eyes open, alert, awake and aware. You might even notice one or two objects in the space around you. So if anyone feels a bit tired after that, that's not uncommon. Sometimes it's a signal, I think I need a good night's sleep, or I need to rest a bit more or take care of myself. Anyone's minds wander a little during that, wander to work, responsibilities. If that happens, people get really worried about that when they start exploring these practices such as mindful self-compassion. But that just signals that your brain is absolutely functioning well. And remember, when it wanders off like that, it's trying to help you on one level. And what we often share in the practices, if you explore them, is like just gently encourage it to come back. Part of these practices is knowing as it wanders off, gently acknowledge it and bring it back. Don't judge it. It's just, that's our brain doing its thing. So when we pause, at the end, what showed up for you in terms of what would nourish you and give back to you? Did anything come to mind? Sleep.
It's music.
Play music. Yeah, wonderful. Music's such there's been some interesting.
Your voice is very soothing.
Oh, thank you. I've been accused of putting people to sleep. Don't listen to the meditations when you're driving. Music's an interesting one too, because there's some really interesting research on how it soothes us too. I mean, depending on the type of music, but UNSW research found a couple of years ago that if we listen to music that we personally find very soothing and relaxing when we go to sleep, we have better quality sleep. Now for others it might be too stimulating because they might have a really musical brain and they want to start singing, etc. But you might want to play with that if you're someone who's been struggling to sleep. Any other examples?
Water.
Drinking more water, hydrating, yeah. Anyone have spending time with kids? Yeah. So it's interesting when we take the pause and we ask the question, it often speaks to values as well, like, the people I want to spend most of my time with. And that's I want to highlight why that's such an interesting response. Is what are we learning these skills for? Well, on one level, it's to protect our mental health and well-being and protect our business. But long-term, these skills are always in service to our big values and often how we want to show up for our friends and our family and the people we hold dear. That's what they're generally in service to. I want to highlight whatever it was for you that might have showed up. And if it was a little quiet, don't be surprised, because people who are very busy sometimes will go like, what is it that I enjoy? What is it that I like again? Because all of my energy is going into business. And if that's the case, sometimes it can be helpful and consider, what did you love doing when you were a teenager? What did you love doing when you were a kid? And trust that, because that actually still is very much part of who we are, whether it's time in nature or being creative or playing music or spending time with friends. Self-care is so underestimated, but I want to highlight some really interesting research. Some of this research was done in South Australia and other parts of the world, but that when we are engaging with self-care regularly and carving time out for ourselves and making it a non-negotiable, then the knock-on effect is quite profound, because it's helping us fill our cup. We're replenishing our resources, our long-term well-being benefits, our work benefits, but how we're interacting with one another and our family also benefits. So that's why I love this quote by Audre Lorde, that it's never selfish. That's an act of self-preservation. So I'll let Jamie talk about this interesting graph.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, one of the interesting things, we've put this program out to a lot of people now. So results from 1,000 workers, we're seeing about this very interesting shift in terms of where their resilience sits. So we know that that resilience is linked to, when we have people who are low in resilience, they're much more likely to have some of those common mental health conditions. And after they do the program, you can see the numbers in that group shift very markedly. So if they go from around 16 to around 9 in that group. And on the other side of things, at the high resilience level, we're seeing about twice as many people in that group as well. So it's something that'll be very interesting if you've got a group of employees that you work with, looking at how you can boost their resilience. I'd really urge you to sign them up to the program, go through it with them, take some time out, and it will benefit everyone within the business. So this offer is open to both owners and employees. One of the interesting things that you may or may not be aware of is that there's psychosocial risk legislation, which basically means that we're required to treat risk to psychological health same as to physical health. So that's something that has been in the Workplace Act since 2012, but it's a lot more focus on it now, and there's since 2023 they sort of put out a code of practice in South Australia. So that's something that I guess should be on the radar of everyone. And where we cannot eliminate certain risks, we must take measures to reasonably mitigate these risks. So, for instance, we work with a lot of firefighters. They have to go out and attend motor vehicle accidents, and come across some pretty horrible scenes. There's no way that we can change that part of the job, but what they are doing is having people go through this program, learn these skills, so they're actually better prepared when they actually come across those things.
We've done a lot of work with Business Victoria as well, people who've run small businesses there. And a good example of a risk that you cannot change is like when you have a customer or a client who's just having a really bad day and that's somehow being taken out on you or your staff. That does happen at times. So you can't predict when it happens, but it's also, if they have the skills to be able to care for themselves and be able to stay calm in that situation, can be really helpful.
So yeah, a few tips in terms of how we generally like people to roll this program out. When you register, you'll actually there's a section where you can invite other people to join you. Also take that brochure, there's a QR code if you can pass it around to other people that you work with. If there are other businesses that you think could benefit, be sure to pass it around to them. What we find is a major boost to people actually completing the program is just scheduling time out for them. So if there's 15 minutes, each of the sessions are 15 minutes. So what we recommend is do one session a day. And if they've got that sort of permission to do that, they'll generally do it at much higher rates, and check in with them, check in how they're going. And one of the other things that we'll have regularly is webinar events, so you'll get to hear more of Sadhbh's lovely voice.
So these webinars are across a lot of different topics around mental health. Next week we'll be running a 4-part series on self-compassion strategies. So a little bit like the practice we did today, but we're exploring it even more, developing that skill so we're able to access it on the go. We explore different self-care practices and how they protect our mental health and well-being. If you can't come to a session, all of our events are recorded, and we have a bit of like an SBS on demand situation with our Brain Food platform. We can access anything that you want to through that platform. Our practicals often feature leading experts. So last month we had Dr. Peter Baldwin from the Black Dog Institute talking about burnout. How do we protect ourselves and our teams from burnout? Next month we'll have a session on nutrition and mental health by Amanda and Holly from Mood Food Nutrition up in Queensland, and they're expert dietitians on that. In July we have the lovely Associate Professor Nicole Lovato from Flinders University, and she's going to be sharing with us how do we get good quality sleep, what we should and shouldn't be doing. And that's she's also been, if you've been following Michael Mosley's work on sleep through ABC, she's been working closely with him on his work in Australia. So again, live or on demand, if you register to Mind Army, you can do all of these events over the next 18 months for free. And another way of meeting your duty of care in terms of that WHS Act is letting your colleagues, if you have small teams, know about those events and that they're free to join them, so that they're, people may not go to the first one, but they might go to something that resonates with them. So we're trying to cover a lot of different topics that will resonate with different people. So this is the series that we have coming up as of next week, which is again focusing on understanding our nervous system. How do we restore and give back to our brains and bodies? How do we develop self-compassion? And that has a really protective impact on our mental health. This is the session that we'll have with Mood Food, how to eat for good mental health, especially when we're on the go. I've asked Holly and Amanda to say, how do we do this when we're so busy that we forget to, if you're like me, I have a tendency to forget to stop for lunch. I'll have lunch at 3 o'clock. It's a terrible habit that I picked up working in private practice and having psychiatrists. Can you just squeeze someone in here? And not having boundaries around my own self-care, ironically. So,
and just to let you know, if you do register for the program, you'll automatically receive invitations to all of these events. You'll also receive access to our Brain Food platform, which has a whole range of different resources in it. So you'll find videos and podcasts, a whole bunch of articles, and also those events recordings. And if you're interested in how things work, you'll also see the research behind everything as well. So get down to the nitty-gritty. So if you want to get started, as I said, click the QR code there, or use the one that you've got on the handout. Yeah. The government also likes to get our feedback on how we're doing. They're very sure, want to make sure that we're doing a good job. So if you want to provide any feedback about this event, please click that QR code, and there's a very short survey for that. But thank you so much for listening today.
Are there any questions or comments? Yeah.
I'm curious about how you would suggest getting employees on board for this program.
Sure. Do you want to answer that? Or?
Yeah, there's. I think one of the things that's great if you do it yourself, and you can actually talk to your experience of it. That can be great. And what we're seeing is with a lot of organisations, they say, hey, this is just part of our training. This is something that we expect of people. You do other sorts of health and safety. We teach everyone how to lift a box, or I'm sure there's lots of things in landscaping that we teach them so they don't chop their fingers off. I think, looking at it that way can be really helpful.
It's not about just doing one session.
No.
One group of...
Yeah, so the program itself is 10 short interactive sessions, but there is all this other stuff that you can look at on an ongoing basis. And
5 years later, thinking, oh, I've done that.
Yeah, and that's what we try and do is provide for ongoing learning. So
at the end of the program, people are asked to make a self-care action plan, choosing the strategies that resonate with them. But we've had, with ambulance officers, fireys, builders, lots from all walks of life who come back in and do it again because it resonates with them. They're like, they start feeling stressed out and they come back into the resource. Yeah, which is what we want. But having the events every month too reminds them, I might come back in and do a bit more of the training, or I might revisit it. And we absolutely want that because resiliency fluctuates naturally. But we know these practices can really nourish and replenish our resiliency over time. Yeah.
These practices are just techniques you can learn to manage
stress.
your
yeah.
and stress, so you can go back and you can repeat.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can come in and out whenever you want.
Come in and out whenever you want. It will remember if you've had a phone call and you have to dash off. It will remember where you were in the program. And as I said, we've got mindfulness strategies, cognitive strategies, how to interact with our minds and our bodies in a much more compassionate, kind way. How do we talk to ourselves? How do we process challenging emotions? That's where mindful self-compassion comes in. And again, physically, what are we doing to take care of ourselves? So all of that's kind of covered in the training. And again, the webinars are there to just keep people aware of what the research is saying, keeping up to date. And there's so much amazing research in Australia. That's one of my favorite, having a research background as well, like getting to chat with professors down in South Australia or some over in WA, like what are they doing and what can they share with us? Because they're often just so busy trying to publish, they don't get a chance to speak to people unless they go to conferences. So, yeah.
Just, on the second to last page, it says about Indigenous
Wisdom. Yeah.
Yes.
wisdom.
That's part. So we've had
old knowledge.
old knowledge. Yeah. So we've had the opportunity to work with Indigenous advisors to build out the Indigenous part of the brain flume of our platform. So that's recommended reading, resources. We've had Dr. Paul Gordon on a webinar not long ago. He wrote a book called The Dreaming Path, sharing his insights on how can we engage nature as a protective factor of mental health, which probably you and your colleagues may resonate actually, and it's one of my passion areas, when we spend time in nature, how it protects our mental health by just using a few extra techniques. So nature-based therapy is a really interesting growing area. We'll be holding a webinar again on nature-based therapy in a couple of months' time, but there is one recorded on the webinar.
Anything about Indigenous nutrition?
No, I'd love to, because there's a woman up in Bundjalung Nation called Delta K who does a lot of bush tucker walks and talks, and I'm hoping to get her on at some point to talk about the unique benefits of that, but also like connecting to country in that way. But if you have any suggestions, and this is something, the benefit of going to different places and meeting different people, if you have suggestions of, someone that can speak on that topic, then please let us know, because we're always looking at ways to enhance our webinars or connect to people who can share important information like that. Yeah. Sorry.
You in South Australia for long? Are you just travelling around doing?
We're going to be coming back and forth. So we'll be making a few visits over time. So we'll put out notices as we're
when we're back in
doing other
South
events.
Australia.
Yeah.
Is it something that you need to be in a good place before you enter the program, or if you're already suffering anxiety or going through some harsh situations, is it something you need to wait until you've dealt with?
It's a really good question. I've actually given this to a lot of clients I've worked with, particularly those experiencing anxiety, because the strategies taught in Mind Dharma draw from evidence-based psychological therapy, such as acceptance and commitment therapy, compassion-focused therapy, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, that are used to treat, even though it's not a treatment program. So a lot of people find it very beneficial. And then there's going to be lots of groups who are less likely to go to the GP or get a referral to a psychologist, and we see this as being a safe way of accessing these practices, and then afterwards they're much more likely, or they may get a boost and that will hold them for a while, but what they've taken on board is actually the most resilient thing for me to do is to go and have a chat with my GP and maybe see a psychologist, because they're going to teach me the same skills, but I'm going to get it in a more tailored way and I'll unpack what's going on for me. And so, my answer is yes, it can be beneficial. The exception is if someone's gone through a really significant trauma, like someone's grieving, and you might bring this in down the track, because grief is actually a very natural human experience, and we will all unfortunately go through that at some point in life, but the most important thing we can do as colleagues is to let them know we're there for them, and that we have an open door. And to be aware of the resources that are available in your community, whether you have, posters up about things like Lifeline, GP Medicare referral, that it's visual in your workplace, that there are these other resources available, but that you too are a bit aware of that. But interestingly enough, some research from Black Dog Institute has found, like, if we signal frequently that we're safe to have these conversations with, it may not be the 8th time that we mention well-being, it might be the 50th time, but it keeps signaling to people that we're a safe person to chat about this stuff with, and then they might come to us, or they might go and look at the thing that you've recommended, or that you've, in their own time, privately. Yeah.
How is it any different to just going to a psychologist, and you're saying about, obviously a psychologist has more of a tailor-made program, to help you get through things, whereas this is more of a broad scope?
I would say the skills are actually very much the same. So I would use these skills a lot with my clients. But what's different is that it's personal to you. So at the end, you create a self-care action plan. So it's more you're self-pacing through it. Whereas with a psychologist, you're kind of checking in. You're probably going more into the story of what has led you to come to see them. Some benefits of online programs like this are, one, we know only 1% of small business owners and small business employees will actually reach out to physical resources, so they're much less likely to go and see someone. But they're more likely to engage with online material, things that they can do in their own time. The other, we know in male-dominated workplaces too, there's a much stronger tendency to lean into stuff that can self-pace, that they feel they can discover and explore in their own time and come in and out of, than always attending sessions. That's unfortunate, but that is what it is. And we see this kind of filling that gap, allowing people to access support, and then hopefully when they really do need it, they've been given the right messages that it's okay to seek support, that it's a strength. Yeah, and it's more readily available.
It's not always easy to get time with.
Yeah, that's a challenge at the moment.
And that's a really good point, and that was something I wanted to touch on too, like the waiting times for psychologists at the moment. Like rurally, about 2 years ago, I knew that a third of psychologists had closed their books. It's very time consuming and costly to train as a psychologist. Unfortunately, I can speak to that. So even how we're getting more people through is a big issue at the moment, and the federal government are really looking at that. But this is where online programs come in. But I would say, if you know of anyone who's struggling to get into a psychologist, there are a couple of other resources. So when you go into Mind Dharma, there's a support page, and we list different free supports that are available. Beyond Blue have 6 free mental health coaching sessions that you can attend. There's also the Black Dog Institute's free online clinic, where people can get free and confidential feedback on how they're doing right now, and it will give them advice on, it sounds a little bit like anxiety right now, here's what we recommend. But again, why they're popular is because people can do it privately in their own time, and it doesn't cost them anything.
It's confronting too, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And there's still, unfortunately, a lot of stigma around mental health. So every conversation you have about breaking down the barrier to people reaching out for help, it's really important. But being mindful of the shortages is important. The other thing people are not always aware of is that GPs aren't all trained equally. Not all GPs are trained in mental health. You know, I've had referrals from GPs where I've had one-liners, please see Joe for ? Anxiety spelt incorrect, thank you. Right, what's happened here? Have you chatted to them at all? It's because they're in and out in 7 minutes. I don't know if you've had that experience at the GP clinic. Right? Like, what are you possibly going to have a conversation about in that short amount of time? But you can ask for a GP that has mental health training. You can ask. And the Black Dog Institute have a free resource on their website. So we're affiliated with the Black Dog Institute on how to find a GP with mental health training. And that means they'll know what questions to ask, have a conversation in a really compassionate way, and then encourage them to reach out for support, engage with different resources. So if you have a chance to check out the Black Dog Institute as well, that's where we did our research. I'd encourage you to do. There are lots of wonderful resources, and also resources on, you know, how do I support someone that I'm worried about? How do I have that conversation?
There's also an emergency mental health clinic in town, which anyone can walk in.
That's brilliant. That's so good to know. Yeah. So we have South Australia specific resources in the support page, but if you go through the program or you hear about another resource, just let us know, because we can update our resources too. So if you go like, wow, I heard about this. We often promote Well Mob and 13 Yarn that provide a lot of support to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. It's been tailored for that. So lots of different resources too. Resources for anyone who has small or young children. You may have heard of Tresillian. They're another great group who support families who maybe...
Children, what age is this?
So interestingly enough, we have had people share that they've done their training, including our colleague with their teenagers, like 14, 15-year-olds. They're able to start to get the concepts. And our program will surprise you. It's highly animated. So it's quite quirky. We try to, and that was from feedback from AMBOs and Fireys and lots of different groups. They're like, don't bore us to death with a lot of text, make it a bit interesting. So the training has a lot of animation, some quizzes. We want to keep you engaged. We do use animation and color and a bit of humor because we know the brain responds better to that. It tends to stand out. Whereas if we just have too much text on the screen, we start to, naturally lull, which you're maybe feeling right now, which is understandable. Any other questions or?
I'm just thinking again about rolling this out.
Yeah.
So there's no limit to how many employees can access this?
No, so they define a small business as up to 20, but if they also have, for a family business, it's undefined. So
we'll just roll with
I'm rolling with that, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, like I was talking about, how do you get people on board for this? It's more of the awareness factor around what some of the symptoms might be and what some of the strategies could be, and just voicing, just normalising.
Yeah, I think normalising everyone doing the program, I think having that group participation works really well. So yeah, sending that invite to everyone to take up the program and then scheduling time out for them. They're probably the two best things that you can do.
And then you might get people who, you can just support it and let them know and touch base, but you might get people who choose not to do it.
Sometimes.
Yeah, and that's fine as well.
We've had people register and really want to do it, and then they start doing it 3 months later. And that's why the government have also allowed a good 18-month period for people, because it's just, it's like, oh, I remember that, I must check that out. And then they see it again and they see it again, but then you mentioned to it, and then colleagues like, oh, I've been doing this thing, it's a bit strange, but I kind of found it helpful, and then they're more likely to tap into it. So we want to allow some time and space for that. Another incentive we found really interesting works, especially if you do a 10-day challenge or you join our October. So October is a great time to do a push for this because it's Mental Health Month, and you'll hear a lot more. And sometimes everyone's tired of it by that point. But having an incentive where it's, there's a prize. We often use book prizes. So the series next week, I'll be running a book prize each week. But you might have your own incentive that you know works really well. We've done a lot of work with corrective services, interestingly enough, and they love Bunnings vouchers. That's their thing, and other groups like Kmart vouchers. But just a little bit of an incentive. We also know from workplace mental health research signals to our colleagues and our team members that we care about them. That we want to reward them for doing this training. We've had one group that gave people a day off once they completed the training. That was hugely popular.
And as an employer, do we get notified when an employee has completed the training?
No, but they do have the option of, they get a certificate at the end of the completion of the training, so they can print that certificate. It's a PDF, so that can be a way you can say, just send us your certificate and we'll reward you as such.
They can complete the training by having it playing and not watching it, though, can't they?
Oh,
They have to.
We can tell.
Yeah, they have to go through the whole thing.
Yeah, they have to go through it. We can tell if people do that.
Yeah.
In that way anyway.
But going back to and I encourage you to check out Safe Work in South Australia, the new legislation that came in last year, the amendment to the Work Health and Safety Act and psychosocial hazards, because this will help you meet as an employer your duty of care, because it's an evidence-based program. So some employers that we've worked with, New South Wales Ambulance for the last 6 years, have our training as mandatory. They have to do it. If you're a paramedic, doesn't matter your experience, you have to do Mind Dharma, because it helps them develop skills that will protect their mental health on the job. And so different employers take different approaches, but eventually everyone will be moving towards meeting the duty of care. And the regulators, when it comes to safe work or work safe, depending on what state and territory, and they're becoming much more active in prosecuting when employers are not honouring their duty of care. Victoria has been the most active. In New South Wales, we just had a case last week. It doesn't matter how small your business is. Victoria had a cafe owner that was fined $300,000 and really, I would say, named and shamed in the media over not protecting their employees from stresses on the job. So check out the Act. More Mind Dharma helps is, again, providing practices to help you deal with the stressors that you cannot get rid of. That's just the challenging colleague, the book's not balancing this week, all of that type of stuff. But if you check that out, it's helping you meet your duty of care. Yeah.
Yeah.
How long do the webinars go for?
The how-to webinars go for about 30 minutes. The Mindful May series or the Rest Fest series, that they'll be 40-minute sessions because we do practices. And again, they're all on the Brain Food platform. So if you can't come live, someone can then watch it. We often have, like last month's session, we have 900 people register, about 350 online, and twice that will track it in their own time. And I think probably because of COVID, we got very used to, doing things kind of online on our own a little bit. Yeah.
Would you recommend playing that and watching it in a group setting?
Yeah, loads of people do that. That's actually a great idea. Like if you put on a lunch and learn, or you have like nibblies like this, your choice whether you bring alcohol or not. That might not be safe if it's a work day or if you're allowing people off for the rest of the day. But why not? Watch the session, and if you're doing the mood food one, make sure that there's lots of healthy options because then you're reinforcing it. Yeah.
Sounds awesome.
But,
Yeah. Well, thank you all. We've got to fly, unfortunately.
We've got to head.
But yeah,
Got to go do another one in a pub. It is actually in a pub. Yeah.
thanks for Garden Master
Thank you,
and
Garden
also for the Master Landscapers Association for all their efforts in putting this together. It's great to be able to chat with everyone today.
And if you have any questions, just reach out at any point in time. If you're curious about how to bring it out, just let us know and we'll provide you with the resources that help you do that, and happy to have a chat. Or if you have recommendations going, this would look great on the platform, then please let us know. If you have a suggestion around Indigenous nutrition or anything like that, please reach out. Always trying to improve our program. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.